Good morning and welcome to Carolina Cares, an iHeart media production hailing from our flagship family of stations, WVOC, in Columbia, South Carolina. My name is Tyler Ryan. Thank you so much for joining us for Carolina Cares today. You know, it's no secret that true crime has captured the attention, the imagination, and even the expertise of our country. Going back to the days of the old gumshoe serials, to the more reality-based unsolved mysteries, To Catch a Predator, Forensics Files, The First 48, and countless others. Crime is the biggest genre of television, with the paranormal, of course, being second. People love their ghost. But now in the age of podcasting, what do you think the biggest type of podcast is? Broadcasting hundreds of shows, you guessed it, true crime and unsolved crime. Now let's not even get into the shows that involve the scripted classics. You know, the whodunits. I mean, how many alliterations of Law and Order or NCIS are there? I would wager a guess there's more of those than there are sequels to Police Academy movies, and that's a lot, right? From current and retired police investigators to private investigators and, of course, the armchair detective, not to mention those of us who wear tinfoil hats on our collective heads and presume that everything is a conspiracy. Crime, criminal activity, and solving crimes is somehow built into our DNA. We just want to be involved. We want to know the story. The reality is, however, that unlike many television shows that wrap up in 44 minutes of content or true crime recaps that provide some sort of solution, there's an exponentially growing amount of cases that go unsolved or cold. Now, we're not talking necessarily about the vandalism down the street or the car breaking B&E or breaking and entering at the mall during Christmas. Every year, there are a disturbing amount of major cases. We're talking homicides, missing persons cases that go unsolved, or cold, as it were. According to the RAND study, there are more than 200,011 unsolved homicides that remain in question. This is since 1980. 211,000 since 1980. So if you go ahead and extrapolate those numbers out, potentially there are 250,000 people who have committed murder who are walking around society today unpunished for their crime. Now, as the national trends go, 65% of homicides each year will go unsolved, and that's in these current years. And that number, if you were to look at all the trends and the raw data, that's only going to grow. There's another number I want to share with you that, give 600,000 people. They go missing. Over 500,000 people go missing every single year. And that in 2017, that's where that stat came from. 27,000 of those 600,000 were kids, our children. They go missing. And again, that's 2007 stat numbers. Now, I do want to point out these numbers and this information is in no way, shape, or form an indictment on law enforcement, the investigators themselves. There are nearly 1 million police officers in this country, nearly 20,000 police agencies who work tirelessly on cases, try to do their job. More than often, it really comes down to manpower, resources, and in some cases, it's training. It really is. Now, remember, these numbers are simply data. There's really no interpretation necessarily, at least not yet, as to why this happens. Eagle Cold Case and Missing Persons Institute is a nonprofit organization. It was founded on the basic principles of identifying problems, training groups to examine evidence that has been gathered in hopes that with a fresh set of trained eyes, partnering with law enforcement, perhaps people can start eating away at those numbers or maybe stymie the numbers that continue to grow every single year. Joining me from the ECCMPI, the Eagle Cold Case and Missing Person Institute, the founder of the organization, James Carsten. Good morning to you, sir.
Hi.
Well, hi. There you are.
Well, thank you for having me, Tyler.
Absolutely. And I do want to point out, listeners, I know many of you know that my background before media was law enforcement, and I am a member of this 501c3. I serve on the board, just in full disclosure, so I do want to point that out. But for the sake of today's discussion, James, I want to go into some of the numbers, maybe some of the theories as to why this is happening and what can be done, with this growing problem of cold cases. And again, we're not talking about the B&Es at Christmas. We're not talking about the stolen wallet, the mugging. We're talking about major cases, homicides, missing persons, and cases of those nature. But first, if you don't mind, James, I want to kind of dig back into you because your background is law enforcement, and you've got a very vast background of data collection. And what we're talking about is data. It's numbers is what the ECCMPI does. But let's talk a little bit about you.
Sure. So I'm retired from the U.S. Army, and I was in for 22 years. My career started out in intelligence collection. So I come from that industry and that side of the military. And after about 5 years performing in the intel side, I switched over to what's called Army CID. For the people that don't know what that is, that's the same as Navy NCIS because they have a TV show. That's why most people know them. So the Air Force, Navy, and the Army all have what's called a military criminal investigative organization.
You guys would be
Army.
You guys would be kind of like if MPs were the traffic cops. You guys would be like the detective version. Would that be an easy way to put it?
Sure. A lot of times I explain we're the FBI of the Army because that's we assume the title special agent once you come out of the 4-month training program, and it's a stovepipe command concept in the Army. You're not meant to be influenced by the rest of the higher commanders in the Army, so it's as close as you can have to a true concept of an independent investigative agency within an agency.
Sure.
So, so that's where my experience level comes. My experience comes from. I've worked everything from homicides to stolen property to drug cases to frauds and criminal intelligence in the CID world. So after retiring in 2015, like a lot of vets that do over 20 years, I took about a year to just kind of decompress, and kind of figure out exactly what I really wanted to do. I was in my later 40s retiring, and I started. You mentioned podcasts. That's the first thing I jumped into. I started listening to podcasts regularly, and true crime podcasts. Yes, there's a lot of them. I started honing in on some true crime podcasts and listening to the series that they would present, serial podcasts. Sarah Koenig specifically was the first podcast I listened to about Hae Min Lee and her murder. And immediately as I was listening, I went into intel and collector and investigator mode. I started taking notes. I started organizing fact patterns that I was hearing. I started organizing evidence sets that I was hearing and seeing on the website. And I did that with several podcasts. I even reached out to several podcasters, and I started asking questions of the podcasters. I hear you telling the stories, but are you doing anything to investigate the case? I would hear, yes, we're investigating, and I would ask how, and I didn't really hear an investigation plan like I'm used to, and I believe like many in law enforcement or in the intel world would be used to. So I started thinking about, well, what can I do here? I don't really have a mission in my life right now other than just be retired. So why don't I see what I can do to learn more about cold cases? And to be perfectly frank, in my whole law enforcement career, I really didn't work cold cases. Right. I had scores and scores of cases at any one time, but they were all actionable, solvable, type cases. Army CID doesn't have, I don't believe, too many cold cases. So that world was very fictional to me, the concept of cold case. I really didn't go down that rabbit hole that much to even learn what a cold case is and why a case goes cold and that sort of stuff until I found this time on my hands. So I started researching, found out about the 2011 RAND Corps study, as you mentioned, and it was that study that really kind of grabbed a hold of me because that made all the statistical information real to me. I could touch the information.
Right. And as a military CID guy, you really about raw data.
The CID side is criminal investigation. Okay. It's just like a detective in a police department. I mean, you do international. Sometimes you find yourself working international cases with other foreign nations. You find yourself assuming your own cases on behalf of the U.S. Army under 18 U.S.C. and UCMJ, violations of that. And then you find yourself working with the ATF, the DEA, the FBI on joint cases. And then you find yourself in local areas. Let's say you're stationed at Fort Bragg. You find yourself working with the State Bureau of Investigation. You find yourself working with local sheriff's departments and local PDs. So you really get an eclectic blend of law enforcement that an average detective, say, let's pick a city like Atlanta, an APD. Well, the APD detective may find themselves in a DEA task force or some sort of task force, but it's not common that an Atlanta detective is moving outside of Atlanta and, say, investigating stuff in California or in Korea, South Korea, that sort of stuff. So Army CID gets that benefit, that sort of exposure all over the place in law enforcement. But what you just said, yes, that's the intel side. I was a human intelligence collector, which means I interact with people, I extract information from people, but I work with analysts in the intel world. And the analytical side is amazing. All source analysts, signal intelligence analysts, that sort of stuff. They're amazing people because they take that raw data, they take what you're collecting, they spit it back at you and show you a macro picture and some micro pictures that you're not seeing, and it lends to your ability to collect more and more information. Now, it's in that concept that I do not find in your average law enforcement agency, that information and intelligence collection mission. I think there's a low level of that as a detective, but that is a profession in and of itself, information collection and intel product building.
Right.
So I have been exposed to that side of the military, and I have those skills and that experience. So in this journey of research, when I realized, you know what, there can be something that's done here, and that is a reverse engineering of all what's considered cold cases. That was my first kind of epiphany.
And I do want to stop you right there because I think we need to define real quick. Define cold case. I think we all kind of have a general layman's term of what a cold case is. I don't know that everybody shares that same. For me, a cold case is one that the investigation has followed every possible lead. It's sitting there. We're waiting for a break, and unfortunately, I know as a police detective, every day I'm working on case A, I'm getting B, C, D, E, E, F on my desk, and so eventually case A sits at the bottom because it's I have nothing else to do, right? I mean, that's the layman, I think, common definition of a cold case.
I think you're right on that, and that's one of the first things I noticed is there seems to be across the nation a broad definition of cold case and then a malleable definition of cold case. That's what I'm observing, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So that, like the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and I'm sorry, I'm not quoting it to you, but it's something to the line of criminal investigation where no further evidence is available and it's pending new evidence. So therefore, it is a cold case. And that implies that the law enforcement agency did everything humanly possible, forward thought all angles of information and evidence, and addressed it all, and we're just lacking evidence and information, and we have none coming in. Right. That I could understand, that if that was true across the board. So, but then you find some areas where you look, and you brought up, again, this isn't a reformation on law enforcement procedure and investigating. That's not what this is. But the sad reality is, you mentioned numbers. There is, if you go to the Department of Labor stats for nationwide and you look, there's just under 1 million sworn law enforcement across the nation. Now, you threw out some other numbers. 18,000 law enforcement agencies, state and local, roughly 3,000 sheriff's departments in all 50 states. Right. And then the rest are PD, state agencies like SLED for South Carolina, GBI for Georgia, and down to the small PD. That's roughly 18,000 agencies. So then you look at, well, what do those 18,000 agencies do when they don't solve a crime, specifically being homicide? And that's where I think there isn't a solution mechanism. I don't believe there is a collective psyche of this is what should happen when an agency finds themselves not solving a homicide. And I have a feeling that comes from the amount of crime that they have to deal with in their footprints, that it's not feasible that every agency across those 18,000 can look in the past and assign an individual or a team to become historical researchers, because that's kind of what you have to do. When a case sits for, 20 years, let's use a grave one, 20, 25, 30-year cold case, as they would call it. Well, how do you know everything was done the first time 30 years ago? I mean, technology changes. Procedures change, DNA, there's the big one. The DNA has just leaps and bounds from the 90s on, So, so if if one doesn't take a case today in 2020, the term I use is reverse engineer. Reverse engineer simply means read every word of every line on both sides of every page and the totality of the case. Mm-hmm. Make a list of what you know and what you don't know. Start forming your unknowns into questions. Who killed Sally? Where was Sally killed? Mm-hmm. Why was Sally killed? These become what we call priority intelligence requirements, or PIRs, as I talk in acronyms. And then those questions will correspond to a proactive step or many steps, which would be your investigative plan or leads list. And then that's the symbionts, and it's a circle, and it never stops. So as you investigate and you solve for, you go back and answer for the PIR that populates your known column. What I've done is I've blended the best practices of military intelligence collection operations and law enforcement operations, smashed them together, and made a logical way that the armchair sleuth or the APD detective could employ a methodology and reverse engineer a case and show themselves either everything was done done correctly, done in accordance with what could be done today. Right. Because sometimes you probably know this. There's sex assault kits sitting in evidence rooms that haven't even been run through CODIS.
Sure.
I mean, we hear about that in the news all the time. There's always an article about X number of sex assault kits sitting in an evidence room and not even run through CODIS and could be as much as 5 years old or so. So, there is a human error piece, I believe, that plays into it because nobody is perfect. I believe a huge piece of it is the ability to form a functioning cold case unit to become historical researchers. That costs money, it costs time, and it costs manpower.
Well, let me break that down. I'm talking with James Carsten, the founder of the Eagle Cold Case and Missing Person Institute. It is a nonprofit that's put together to train individuals, citizens, and law enforcement on how to re-examine, re-engineer, how as he put it, cold cases in an effort to assist law enforcement to clear these cases. But you mentioned there's 1 million police officers. Well, there's 320 million Americans. So first of all, that's
actually you said 20 million. There's actually, according to 320 million.
Well, that's what I meant. 320 million Americans. Okay. But of those million police officers, you're not talking about 1 million APD detectives. You're talking about 1 million sworn. So you're not talking about, there's not 1 million guys on the street right now because half those people are administrative. They're doing other tasks. There's traffic functions, right?
Yes. So I've done a survey of many detectives and police officers, some chiefs, some sheriffs, over the last 3 years. And this isn't documented. This is just anecdotal for you. I would ask this question, hey, how many law enforcement agencies are across the nation? And I typically get, I don't know. That's what I typically get. Mm-hmm. And I would ask, how many sworn law enforcement across the nation? I typically get, I don't know, what, 500,000? I've gotten as much as 2 million. So anyway, the point is, even in the practice of law enforcement, I don't think the national psyche is really realized by small departments. So let's get to the number you're talking about. So the Department of Labor estimates 1 million sworn law enforcement. What does that mean? That means sworn, badge carrying, can effect arrest, right? That sort of stuff across. There's admin types that are non-sworn, but those admin types wouldn't be investigating anyway.
Sure.
Now out of that million, say that round number million, you got to kind of take 25% off the top. And these numbers that I'm saying, I've done surveys over the 3 years of talking to chiefs and sheriffs, and they've parroted what I'm saying right now. So I've taken parts and I'm regurgitating what other leaders in LE estimate the numbers to be. This isn't just me doing it.
So 25% are like admin who are the captains, sergeants, majors, chiefs. Brass,
admin, the people that wouldn't be out collecting information and solving crime per se. Mm-hmm. Then out of that, so you take 25% out. Then when you're left with 75%, you got to kind of take 50% of that 75%, because across the nation, most patrols don't work investigations. Right. They do incident reports, they respond, they secure scenes, they're doing traffic, they're doing all the initial response.
And they're security, the ones who are coming when you call 911. It's that line officer who's a first line of defense, the first guy who rolls up on a homicide or a dog complaint, but he's going to that call.
Right. And so not every department, as you know, is like that. There's some small departments that patrols are detectives. So the detectives actually wear a uniform and patrol also. But, in your average size police department to your larger police departments, there's a clear division between the people who go out and investigate scenes, investigate crimes and case files, and then those that patrol. There's kind of a clear division there. So by the time you take that 50% out of patrol, you're left with about a 25% personnel base. So that's basically 250,000 souls across the nation. So now do the math in your head. And I'm going to say something else about bubbles here, because I get this a lot. Well, Jimmy, I hear you can't just apply national numbers, a population, and apply it to an APD and an LAPD and an NYPD, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. I get that. Bubbles is where that concept comes in. So you're left with about 25% of investigative personnel across the nation. Now, why are bubbles important? Bubbles are important because I use that term because law enforcement operates in bubbles. They have clear jurisdictions. An APD guy cannot go to South Georgia and just kick a door in and start investigating crime. There's another jurisdiction there. So there's bubbles. Mm-hmm. Now, crime and people don't respect bubbles. Crime moves freely without boundaries or bubbles. And the people who commit crime move freely without boundaries and bubbles. But the law enforcement side operate in the jurisdictional bubbles. So that's an added challenge for law enforcement. Mm-hmm. The person who commits a crime in Atlanta, I don't know why I'm using Atlanta all the time here today, but the person who commits a crime in Atlanta can go to L.A.
Sure.
But the detective who's investigating the crime in Atlanta isn't necessarily going to get on a plane and go to L.A. and track down their guy mm-hmm. or girl, you see? So bubbles are very important when we're historically researching the crime. That is a very important concept I've realized in reverse engineering cases, because what happens if a crime's committed by an individual and they go one jurisdiction over? What happens? Are we really to believe that all 18,000 are joining forces once a crime's committed in Atlanta? It's not logical to think that all 18,000 agencies work that way.
Right.
So I have a different perspective. I came from an agency that was worldwide. So if I'm stationed in the Netherlands and I'm running cases out of the Netherlands and I need a lead conducting in, say Fort Bragg, North Carolina, I do what's called a request for assistance, and I send it to this agent in charge of the Fort Bragg, North Carolina office, explaining what I need done, who I need interviewed, and it's done all under the same template of operation all around the world. That's why Army CID, Navy NCIS, all those, the FBI,
right.
Some of these federal agencies and stuff, can operate that way. But APD can't operate that way very easily.
So what you're left, and we got to get to the actual ECCMPI. We have a few minutes left, Jimmy. Yeah. But basically what you're saying is you're left with these jurisdictions, kind of broken information, and you have no reason to look where. And so with those leads, you're talking about the national and international tentacles. It doesn't happen. So
I can't observe that happening that way. Yeah.
Right.
So what is the solution? What is the solution? Because there's obviously a problem, and mm-hmm. a problem you've said is over 200,000 cases, manpower issues in LE, money, training, all these issues. What is a solution? My short-term solution to long-term solution is to train citizenry to understand information, reverse engineer information, and then be able to provide viable intelligence value to local law enforcement. That's the solution.
So because
the police are always asking for help. You see it every day in articles. I look every single day for cold case articles, and I post it on our Facebook. Mm-hmm. And I'm almost every day, give or take some days, you'll see an article where a sheriff is asking the public for help. Well, how's the public supposed to know to help? The public hasn't been trained to investigate crime. Right. They haven't been trained to collect information. So maybe that's the solution. So that's what we're doing. We've come up with a template. We have a templated training. Template's the wrong word. We've come up with a viable training of 1 to 2 days to find engaged citizenry that want to learn how to FOIA information, mm-hmm. Perform the methodology, and then generate intelligence products.
Now, you're not talking about having citizens go kicking doors, right? You're talking
No,
about
absolutely
sitting at their
absolutely not.
Okay, sitting at their
It's
house
all about information.
reading. Okay.
It's all about just information, that they can touch.
Okay.
It's right in front of them. So that's employing what we call OSINT, open source intelligence collection, on the internet, through mediums like periodicals or magazines or whatever. Well, those are gone kind of the way of the dodo a bit compared to the internet. But yeah, so what we do is we kind of give them base level training to become an intel collector. And intelligence collection has nothing to do with arresting people. It has to do with fact pattern collection, constant evaluation of information, and continually vetting or confirming or what's the word we would say? Refuting, confirming or refuting information in data sets. And that power for a small PD is unmeasurable. If a small PD could be handed an intel packet on a specific case with link charts, concurrent timelines, association matrices of people past and present, then they have viable leads to work off that they're not spending time reverse engineering a case that they already hold. That takes an exorbitant amount of time.
And so you could technically, with the training, the citizens, which obviously is free to the citizens. I mean that's the whole point of the nonprofit. But so let the citizens, the armchair detectives, do that heavy lifting that a line officer just doesn't have time. I'm sure he's skilled. No time. You hand him back. Here, these 5 questions, officer. These are 5 important questions. You may clear the case with them. Go with God.
Absolutely. And ultimately, what I would like to see, I believe in this methodology with every fiber of my being, because it's a whole career of mine. And how long has the U.S. Army been around?
200 plus years.
Yeah, quite a while. So I believe in this so much that I would like to see sheriffs and chiefs saying, let me start a small intel section and do this training and this function for my detectives. I would like to see that one day. I would like to see that we are actually able to help departments function in this way. Whether they have it or not, maybe they do, and they're already performing like that, great. But I can only imagine out of 18,000 agencies that the majority do not have it. And matter of fact, the stats from the RAND Corps study says that 7% of law enforcement has a formal, an organized cold case unit, which implies 93% don't.
Right. So you're left with officers who, even if they're dedicated detectives, will pick up a case on a lead, but they just can't spend all day, hunting down necessarily. And that's awful for the parents, the family members. But that's, again, just not reality of what's happening when you've got 25% of police officers who are investigators investigating the crimes committed by a populace of 320 million. And not to say that all 320 million are criminals, but you can extrapolate those numbers, and it makes it nearly impossible. The ECCMPI, Jimmy, I guess I can boil down for you. You were looking for groups of citizenry in pockets, groups of friends who are interested in true crimes, who would like to take the training and maybe take an active role in helping to clear some of these cases.
Absolutely.
The website is ECCMPI.org, as in Eagle Cold Case and Missing Person Institute. .org. And we've barely scratched the surface, spent 30 minutes together, and I'm going to invite you back, Jimmy, to talk some more about this. I know, like I said, true crime is something people are interested in, just in our DNA. We're just interested or fascinated, and I think there's a lot of people who would say, I want to be involved, I just don't know how. And it sounds like you're probably giving them that answer.
We have a tagline for this. It's no greater challenge, no greater reward. And that's truly how we feel about it. It's completely altruistic, and it's all about engaging as much energy and citizenry as possible to solve a problem. And that's how we see it. And, that's what we want to do. And we want law enforcement to understand that. And we want to work with law enforcement in this.
Outstanding. James Carsten, the founder of ECCMPI, the Eagle Cold Case and Missing Person Institute. You can go to ECCMPI.org. I'll put details on our Facebook page for Carolina Cares as well to learn more information. If you have a group of individuals that want to get together, want to learn and actually be proactive and help law enforcement, this might be a great thing. So, James Carsten, first of all, thank you for your service, your years and years in the Army, and what you're doing now to continue your service to community and country in helping this pandemic of sorts of cold cases. We appreciate you joining us this morning. Absolutely. My name is Tyler Ryan. Thank you so much for joining us for Carolina Cares, an iHeart Media production, and I will speak with you in 7 days.